Would you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts, O God, be pleasing to you this morning and always, for you are truly our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I'm hoping that some of you had an opportunity to watch the movie It's a Wonderful Life. We watched it here in Fellowship Hall on Thursday a couple of times. And perhaps you have it closer in your memory than I did. I've watched it several times over the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that we talked about on Thursday is often if we watch it just on a network channel on the television, we don't get the whole movie. And so for some of the folks who were watching it, they realized they really didn't remember the beginning of the movie at all. And part of it is this little conversation where God is sending Clarence down to help George out. You hear in the beginning all the prayers that are going up from all of George's family and friends, because we kind of get a glimpse of what happens later, early on, that he is in a really, really discouraging place. We use that as a piece, a viewpoint, to kind of look at our own understanding of money and tie in what does it mean to have spiritual practices around money, and how do we serve God and community from that place, instead of just a cultural understanding of how we might just offer our gifts, which we'll do a little bit later in the service. This is, as you've heard through some of these words that have been spoken this morning, an invitation to look at your own life, to look back as to where your spiritual practices, or your practices in general, your understanding about money has come from. But before we get there, let's look for a moment at this text. So this is about taxes. The Pharisees are trying to, as happens many times in the New Testament, they're trying to set Jesus up. They're trying to get him in trouble. So in this particular instance, the trouble is going to be either Jesus' response to this question, he'll respond in a way that will get him in trouble with the Roman government if he says to the people, don't pay your taxes, right? And then the Roman government's going to be after him saying, oh no, you can't do that. Or else he's going to say to set aside their money in a different way, that it's only God's. And so he catches them in their little game that they're playing. And what he lifts up that's important for us is that he says, and he says this not only in this place, everything belongs to God. Everything. And that our way is supposed to be to align ourselves and everything that we do, how we offer compassion to others, the work that we have, our vocations, how we treat our family and friends, how we interact with our neighbors. Everything in our life, including our money, needs to be aligned with God. And so, and they're kind of shocked by this, right? Which is, again, not unusual. But that leaves a big question for us. How is it that we understand our own alignment with money? In that it is God's. Even though you are the ones that are working for it. You work, you take home a paycheck, you pay your bills, you put food on the table, you pay your mortgage or rent. And if at the end of the day there's some left over, you also save for the future. Creating a spiritual practice of how we look at money, how we understand money, often myself included many times in my life, brings up fears. It brings up fears primarily around not having enough, right? We always wonder, will we have enough? We live in a worldview of scarcity. Now, I don't know if you grew up with that worldview of scarcity. I certainly did. It's really interesting because as I have gone through these materials, and if you're a part of a Sunday school class, you may have opportunity to look at some of these questions yourself. But what were your earliest memories of money? Mine were around not having enough, and they came directly from my mother. And as I look at my mom's life, I never quite understood this because my grandfather always had a good paying job. Most of the people in their family at one time or another ended up living with my grandparents because my grandfather had the house and had the means to pay for whatever relatives were out of work at that time, right? And so for years, my mom's bedroom, some of you have heard this story, I think, was literally a half bath. It wasn't a bathroom yet. But there's a twin bed fit in a half bathroom, and that's where my mom's bedroom was, instead of upstairs, because the two big bedrooms upstairs were always for the family, whichever sister or brother and their children needed help at the time. So it's interesting for me to look at my mom's own understanding of money because her life was such that they certainly weren't the wealthiest people in town, but they weren't to the place where they were scrimping and saving either. And so when she got married and the kids came along, she stayed home. My dad worked, and he was a school teacher, and back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, even the 70s, even now, school teachers didn't get paid a lot of money. And so things weren't as I think she wished them to be. And as they came closer and closer to retirement, she developed this internal fear around if something were to happen to my father, what was she going to do? And they had by then cashed in all of their life insurance policies and they'd put them in investments and all of this, and then it was, oh my gosh, what happens to our investments? And so my mom developed this sense of just extreme worry. And little did she know, she passed that directly on to me. Even as a young adult, these same questions for my life of not having enough, even though, except for one instance, I've never really worried about money. I have been very blessed and very fortunate, and I'm not saying I've lived in fancy places in any place that I've ever done or had everything that my mind thinks that it would like to have. But there is this internal question. And so for us, this week particular, I'd like for you to kind of journey into your life and see where your understandings of money come from. Do they come from a parent? And whatever the parent did, either through words or through actions, help you understand, have your understanding of money today. Another thing that my mom did is she was the queen of couponing before that was a popular thing. And that's how she did her shopping. And lots of times meat was the last thing that she would buy because we lived off the land. My dad was a hunter and we ate game. We often had venison roast, not beef roast, because the venison came to us by a way that we could actually afford. Free. My dad's hunting license, that's what it cost. But she learned a way to make all of that work. Later in her life with my dad, long after they retired, she came to a place where she felt more generous, where she felt like she could give to particularly relatives who were having difficult times. And that, too, she passed on to me. But it took a long time for me for that scarcity node to go away. And I still live with it from time to time, but I was thinking yesterday there was a time in my life I lived in Hawaii on an Air Force base. I had 3 small children. I had a stepdaughter who was a part of my family at that time. And like in September, I don't know if it was the Army base or the Navy base, would open up an entire warehouse, probably bigger than this room, filled with toys. And you could go with the biggest shopping carts I've ever seen in my life and fill the shopping carts and put all of these toys, it was nothing but toys, all of these toys on layaway until like 2 weeks before Christmas. And then you had to go pick them up and find a place to hide them in your house, right? And I need to tell you, so this is a weird way to think about scarcity. My kids didn't need toys. They had grandparents. They were spoiled. I bought everything. All 3 of the years that I lived there, I bought everything. Because if you went back the next week, everything would be gone, right? That's the sense of that scarcity mentality. It went away that quickly. So everything, to one point, there was no more room in my house because I became a hoarder of children's toys because I had this understanding that if I didn't get it right then, it really was going to be gone. It's crazy how scarcity shows up in our lives. I mean, when I thought about that, I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. The kids didn't need anything, but because I thought it was going to go away, I grabbed it all. And isn't that sometimes what we do? Keeping everything to ourselves and not understanding that it is in God's abundance that we live because it is all God's to begin with. That notion of scarcity strangles us in so many ways. And yet this text comes and Jesus says, it all belongs to God. How do we live with that when we think about our generosity, not only with the church, but with other aspects of our lives? How we spend our time, for one. It's an interesting thing to be on a spiritual journey related to money. These are some questions that I've never really asked myself in this kind of frame coming into this stewardship time of year. Mike ran across a podcast by Leonard Sweet earlier this week. And Len Sweet was talking about stewardship and what a struggle that is with that word. And that he wants to, and I will also invite you to think of using the word trustee instead. Trustees are ones, now we think of trustees in the church being taking care of property, right? We want to go beyond that. They are the caretakers, and what their job is to take care and make better. And that's what this time of year is about when we come to prepare for 2020. We want to take care and be able to do what we're doing and make better. How can we do that? How will you do that? How will you be a trustee this year as we move into 2020 for next year? What kind of promises or understandings will you have when it comes time to say, here's my pledge, and this is how I want to make better what God's doing with us in this place? So I leave questions for you about where do your understandings of money come from? What are your earliest memories of such? And talk and share about them. Doesn't have to be about amounts of anything, unless you've got weird toy stories of scarcity like I do. But But where do those patterns that you have now come from? Have they changed throughout your life? And for many of you, I suspect they have. But the question for us is, have they changed in a way that is deepening your relationship with God? Have they changed in a way where you're truly living and giving from this place of everything belongs to God? Spiritual journey and money. It's a Wonderful Life. At the end of the movie, George goes through his long thing of discovering that his life has meant something to the people in his community. If you remember in the movie, in the part where George hasn't been alive, when he sees that part of himself, the town is horrible. It's this horrible looking dark place where people are miserable and unhappy. And people screaming, and the street is nothing but bars. And so he's able to see what his gift is, and that's part of what I'm going to invite you to do too. How do your gifts, like his, make a difference in not only this community, but your family community, friend community, Las Vegas, and the world beyond? In the end, all of the people come and participate in the giving and making whole his business again and his life. Everyone. From the person who pulls the pennies out of their pocket to the basket of gifts. This is who we are as the church. This is who we are as people of God. So I urge you again, watch the movie. Pay attention to the characters. Do you act more like Mr. Potter? He's like the Scrooge of the movie, remember? Or do you act more like George and Mary Bailey, or somewhere in between? And the truth be known is we're all a mix of all of those characters. But where are you? Things to think about. May God bless you as you join me and all of us on this journey.